a luring sense of anxiety, a search for truth, a revision of history, a return to the metaphysical, to the mythical, a new sense of fantasy, and the search for a new order. So I want to start with Ellie Ryan from 56 Henry in New York. And she has the work, she's showing the work by Clayton Schiff and Joe Messer. And we're starting with the work of Clayton Schiff Accommodations, for which we had a conversation about it. And one of the things that I found very interesting in the selection of these two artists was not only their approach towards this sense of self, but also the way that they use the title. In one of them, the title seems to be quite codified and darker in the case of Clayton, and in the case of Joe Messer, the title is more romantic and more introspective. So Ellie, can you please tell us a little bit about Clayton's work and the title, and then go into Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for selecting the gallery. I thought it was really interesting what you were saying, Anna, about this kind of like public versus private and the mythical. I think that rings true. For Clayton's work, this one, Accommodations, he was kind of thinking of this like cosmically like invasive, he was calling it like an eminent domain. So he has these different kind of subjects, and for Clayton, his sort of like the way that himself is sort of injected into the paintings as this kind of like avatar like figure that's sort of like part human, part animal. So that's kind of the figure we see sort of with this tunnel below it. So yeah, he was really interested in kind of like creating this environment. And let me see here, there was something that he said about it specifically that I wanted to tell you about.
I was going to ask you if you could read a little bit of what he said about the painting, and also the use of the face, because it seems to be that he repeats the character in different paintings.
Yeah, absolutely. He does repeat this character a lot, which gives it this kind of cartoonish feel. Like the works have a lot of anxiety in them, but I think that this kind of face that he renders makes it like a little bit more friendly and a little less jarring. So you can kind of see the correlations between these faces here. So the Accommodations one, if you want to go back to that first slide. So he said that he likes that it's this environment that renders its subjects complicit and somewhat pitted against one another, used and using. And I figured this was a kind of extra cruelty in it, that there's no shortage of space for that path to fall upon, and yet it goes through someone, which is destructive, but in this case, some kind of a humdrum way. It seems to be pre-cooked into the cat. He's more than used to it and seems to resent the person going through him, but only lightly and maybe as a reminder of his broader condition. So yeah, you see this path kind of going under this tunnel that's created by sort of like the stomach of the cat.
So these sort of like chimeric animals that are half human, half animals also seem to appear quite often in his work. I mean, if we look at the other two slides, if we can look at the other two slides, I mean, especially in the one that I have to my right of my screen, which is this sort of human figure, but also turns into like a tree trunk or even a tree branch. And the other one has the ears of a dog. So what is the connection between this idea of having these anthropomorphic forms?
I think it's kind of the way that Clayton puts himself into the painting, like how he makes himself the subject about it, and that they're these self-portraits in a way. And then they can kind of like morph. So a lot of it's kind of like how this character responds to the environment. And like the surroundings of the environment. Like it's always kind of this single person that's sort of trying to like interact with the world. Like you see this figure sitting down by like a lake of sorts in the image on the right, and then this kind of like isolated figure on a park bench on the left.
Mm-hmm. And if we were to go to the next slide or the other two slides and look at Joe's paintings, I mean, here also the figure is sometimes difficult to read, but as you contemplate the painting, you start sort of understanding that this is an interior, a very domestic setting for these paintings with a lot of domestic objects going around them, and it seems to be again more of a interior reflection of what the self is going through this period. Can you talk us through these two?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the paintings were all made while Joe was pretty much in isolation and like a really warm studio in Bed-Stuy. She lives in her studio. And so the fan that you see kind of coming up in the center of this image is something that's reoccurring in this series of paintings that she made for the Nada presentation. The fan was partially just something that she was looking at a lot because it was so hot in her studio. But she also liked it as kind of like a way to evoke movement within the painting, as this kind of like compositional key, or yeah, sort of like something to utilize in the paintings. And it's interesting that both Joe and Clayton's paintings, it's all just sort of one figure repeated again and again because they were in isolation.
Can we go to the next slide? Because there in the next slide, the figure is much more blurred. So here it's difficult to read where it is. I mean, it's easier to read sort of these, which make reference to the title. She drank it twice. So you see the two bottles to the left of my screen. Thank you for zooming in. But the figure is more difficult to read, and you don't really understand. You see some bowls on the top. Can you tell us about where this, or what is happening here?
Yeah, I think that one of the parts that I really like about this painting is just how it kind of borders on abstraction and figuration. You can see this figure with the zoom in, like you see the head kind of there that's sort of behind these glass shelving.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And so because she was by herself, it's like a lot of, yeah, just her own kind of body repeated through it. And then the part on the right actually kind of mimics like her shower setup. She has one of these sort of, it feels like it's like something from the 90s as far as her studio setup. Like she's got a lofted bed, and then it's pretty much paintings everywhere. So that basin is kind of like, she has a large sink in her bathroom that she showers in. So she's kind of used that, and then you can kind of see like the glass window tiles as well in the right corner, upper right corner.
So she spent the whole time in her studio in isolation, and this is what came out of that isolation. Was she doing some special reading? Do you know of any books that she was reading, or was she just obsessively painting and working in her art?
Obsessively painting and mostly just looking at books of other painters, which you can definitely see like creeping in. Guston, Picabia, Delacroix, Cecily Brown is a big influence for her. And so you can kind of see some of those like visual clues in there with like the looseness of her strokes, but also like the energy that comes in through the paintings. And then she was keeping a notebook, and she would just write down sort of different thoughts that she had. And that's how she titled the paintings, was putting together these different notes that she was making.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to continue with Proyecto Nasal, that is in Mexico and Ecuador. And it's Matthias Armendariz that founded this project first, so in a very nomadic way. And we have two people that founded their projects in a very nomadic way. One of them is, of course, Proyecto Nasal, and the other one, Peana. And but let's start with Proyecto Nasal, who is presenting one artist, which is Matthias Armendariz. And here, going back to our common thread, the things that I would like you to underline, Mauricio, please, for us, is the looking at mythology, astrology, anthropology, and then also to underline the technicality of these works, because this is somewhere where I find alchemy coming into the equation, and I find that quite interesting. So if you could explain to us from the selection that we made, and I made mostly the shields and the scroll mirrors, and then just a very quick reference to the jewels, but I don't want to focus on this. I'd rather focus on the translucent shields and the scroll mirrors to talk about all these mixing of disciplines that coming together with them.
Absolutely, Anna. Thank you so much for inviting us. Matthias Armendariz is from Quito, Ecuador. He was awarded 2 scholarships, one for his bachelor's and another one for his MFA. He studied drawing and printmaking in his BFA, and for his MFA at the Art Institute of Chicago, he did painting and drawing. So I think in his practice, what we see is it's almost like what we see in his practice is it's almost this fantastical and almost this like relic type objects in which we observe a relationship between the human and object, and through his objects we experience some sort of a relationship, let's put it that way. In the translucent shields, he is doing the actual engraving on rice paper that later is suspended on the resin. So we have the metal structure, and then we have the rice paper, which is the one that it's engraved or etched, and that later is suspended in the resin.
I like the way that also this is referencing to some architectural ornaments that one can again go back to these sort of structures of power, like church stained windows, yes, or even the old way of making windows in the medieval times when it was the leather frame and then the small pane of glass. I mean, I think that is also very interesting how he plays with these sort of common denominators, but he uses them in completely different, objectifies them in a completely different way, creating these sort of, as you will say, in some cases, as you will say, they seem to be small. These are not that small. These are 60 by 40, so they're quite voluminous, but the other work seems to be much smaller. So maybe we can go to the next slide and also talk about how this is reminiscent to all the symbolism that we carry as this common denominator of our knowledge of history, society, archaic cultures, and again, this amalgam of materials that seems to be quite dexterous in his work.
Absolutely. I think anthropology comes in, astrology comes in, mythology comes in. And that's what I find fascinating in Matthias's work. Not only that, but what we spoke earlier this week as well is in the different medium that he uses and the different techniques that he uses on the medium. Because these are sculptural paintings, let's put it that way. In here, we're combining not only painting, not only engraving, but also drawing and then also sculpture.
Right.
And so it's like a fusion of all these different ways that Matthias can work. And in this case, what he did, these are metal copper plates. They have been polished in purpose because he wanted them to have this. He wanted them to have this shine in order for the person to be reflected in them as the person is looking at them. That way, also you get color through that translucentness as well.
They're also etched, right? And then in the end, they're each individual objects, or do they have a special reading together?
What he did was each of them was a specific object per se. Let's say in this case we have the 2 snakes, and we have the blue flower, and I can't see the one on the right now, but
you have the blue flower and the spike.
And the spike, exactly. In a way, the way that we made the installation was in a way of like almost like a line, a reading of a line, let's say. Like in these plates, there's some sort of spell or hidden message that needs to be deciphered by the person looking at them. So I think that's when the importance of each person's intuition. I think intuition has a very special place in Matthias's work because
Can we
I
see the
think
next slide so we have a little bit more understanding of the installation? I mean, these are not these are just tips so people go into the web pages and check out better photos of the installation. But I like this one, even though it's a different series, but it gives you an idea of scale and of sense and how he plays with the objects in space.
absolutely. In the case of the shields, we had 4 different shelves, and each of them had mostly 3 plates in them, and one of them had 2. And the way that we installed them was in a way of almost like a coded message hidden in the meaning of the plates. And in the case of the translucent shields, along with the jewels, well, the translucent shields, they have this heraldic shield, some sort of form. And at the same time, they almost have this language of an advertising or a sign. So he's playing with all these different situations of like a sign or advertising, again, the stained glass window that can evoke the historic center of Mexico City, how it's a big inspiration for him. And again, we see the symbology, which I think it's one of the most important details of his work. He plays with symbology and symbols from pre-Hispanic and combined with his own imaginary language, let's say.
Thank you. That's amazing. Let's go to Ana Perez Escoto from Peana, Mexico. Ana fluctuates between New York and Mexico as well. So she started as a nomad and is now settling in Mexico City, although she's from Monterrey. So she'll probably explain a little bit of that mixture to us at one point. But Ana made a very interesting selection of 4 artists. 2 of them are collectives and 2 of them are individual artists. So we're going to start with Sangre. And again, this is taking from Mauricio's comment on pre-Columbian and the mythologies that come into the work. And maybe you can explain a little bit to us how this works into that discourse, and of course the sense of humor, which is one of the things that I find quite engaging about this work.
Hi everyone, thank you Ana for the introduction and for having us here today. Yes, as you said, I'm based between Mexico and New York. Our permanent space is in Monterrey, which is in the northeastern part of Mexico. I'm going to start to talk a little bit about Sangre, who is one of the 2 duos that we work with. Sangre is comprised or made up by 2 artists, René and Carlos, both of them living here in Mexico City. They've been working together for the past 10 years. Their work has multiple layers. They use a lot of historic references to pop culture, the mystical narratives, but always with a particular humor or wit. For instance, this piece makes reference to these containers or bottles that are very common in Latin America to transport water or gasoline. And the caps are these little cats, one of them that is more Hispanic looking, and the other one looks like a little cat from a cartoon.
Yeah, because one of them, of course, is the head of the jaguar, which one always relates to pre-Columbian cultures and to the sense of power. And then the other one brings you straight back to pop culture, cartoons, today's world. Yeah, I find that quite interesting.
Exactly, and they work with many different mediums. Most recently, they did last year the residency in Czech Republic at Futura. They started experimenting with ceramics, and since they've been really focused with ceramic. Their last solo show was all ceramics. Right now, they have a big presentation at Tamayo Museum in Mexico City that opened last week. Again, all with this medium that they're currently obsessed with.
Let's go and talk about Ana Montiel, which is completely different because it's acrylic on canvas. However, she does have interest in meditation, metaphysics, alchemy, sort of that type of work.
Yes, so Anna's work is based or focused in two main themes, which is perception and impermanence. Her work is a reflection on the limits of human experience. She's constantly questioning how solid our perception is. This new series called Echoes, what she's trying to portray is a visualization of the echo as an analogy of the distortion in the phenomenon of perception.
Also the title, Le temps ne coule plus, il jaillit, is time no longer flows, it jets.
Exactly, and that has to do, it's a visual translation of the idea of vertical time developed by Gaston Bachelard, which she's been reading a lot this during quarantine. And what's interesting about this new series, before she would do these, compositions, but they were always very non-linear, very free. And incorporation of geometry and lines is something that's new and that I find it's very interesting of this new body of work.
And then you want to talk about Asma, which is another of the collectives that you're working with the work Listener. And I chose this one because, of course, it has to do with something that is an object that is an adornment, which is, again, sort of very reminiscent of how we've always adorned our bodies and the symbolism that has. And then at the same time, it is an organic form that is difficult to read. And also because when we were talking about them earlier, you were talking about how important the spatiality is in their work, the sense of space. And then all of a sudden, this is something that is just so small and almost like a jewel that it kind of makes me wonder how that correlates with the sense of space.
Yes, so Asma is a duo. Anya and Matthias are the members of Asma. Their work is all through an active collaboration. They're based here in Mexico City. As you said, there's two main components to their work. One is these open narratives, these fantasies that they stories that they develop behind each piece, and many times this installation or relation into the architectural space, they're very interested in how things, when they're in contact with each other, they start affecting each other. Another element too is they're always playing with the painterly and the sculptural. This piece, Listener, is a series of work, and as you said, perhaps in this one the use of space is not as evident. There's a new piece that has been added onto the platform this morning, which is Fantasia 3000, which is a necklace that in that one, it's a long necklace that pretty much falls all the way to, well, there's different compositions that one can make with it, but it can touch the ground or you can hang it from the ceiling. There's different ways of playing with it. And it's based on this new body of work that is also part of it, presented currently at Museo Tamayo, at Otros Mundos. And the narrative behind this piece is basically these jewels are owned by this genderless ogre, or is that how you pronounce it? Like giant. And these are the jewels that this character would use, and there's this whole fantasy behind. There's these little charms that are present both in the bottom part of the earrings as well as the necklace, and also this use of these magical stones, which in this case are resin. In the necklace is a real amethyst.
And last but not least, from your program, Tomasia Cedeño. And I would like you to talk a little bit not only about the technique, but his relation to systems of ancient beliefs and amulets, because here again, there's the word amulet is arised.
Yes. Tomás is very interested in kind of systems of belief that are like in the periphery, and it's also something very common in Latin America, in particular, where there's all these communities with very different systems of beliefs. A lot of time they're involved with brujeria or with things that are not necessarily religion per se. So he's very fascinated with that, and his work many times looked like amulets, or there's this relationship with the mystical, alternative representations of the body, representations of nature. And these pieces themselves, they were created in Oaxaca, where again, there's all these communities with very different systems of beliefs. He was doing there a residency called Casa Wabi, where he was exploring these themes, and at the same time using the resources there to create artwork. These pieces are sand casted, so basically he uses the ground as his mold to create these ceramic panels.
And again, this is drawn on the sand with his finger or a stick or other. It's not necessarily casting objects on the sand, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. So now we know we have to go back to your web page and see the other things that you.
Yeah, the new one.
the new one. And I want to take advantage of this to do a plug-in for Anonymous Gallery, another New York gallery that represents the work of Wendy Cabrera, which is also represented by Peana. And yesterday, Wendy had a small, through NADA, of course, a performance, which was quite interesting. And then there was a webinar, and I really recommend that if that is hanging on the NADA webpage, to look at the performance and listen to the webinar, because it's difficult to find young artists that are as knowledgeable and have such a tremendous energy and passion for what they're talking about, in this case cinema, and her critique of Pan-American relation via the moving image. So that's a short plug-in before we go to Livia. Congratulations, it was amazing.
Thank you, Ana.
Livia, you're in Peru. How are you? So we want to start with Livia, with Shivago Duncan. And again, this is going now more to maybe science and history and the evolution of man and mankind. And I know that Shivago is very interested in the evolution of the pineal gland and how he depicts it in his work. He does it through painting and ceramic. We're going to start with the ceramics, because ceramics seems to be a wonderful medium that people are exploring a lot these days. And we see it not only with Sangre, but we see it with Shivago, who is also has a stage in Mexico and is working with this work there. So Livia, tell us a little bit about the technique and then the juxtaposition of imagery that goes into this sort of description of the evolution of the pineal gland, hence of history, hence of man. And you have to unmute yourself, because otherwise we will not hear you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Ana. Yes, it's true. I'm unmuted yet. Yes, Shivago Duncan, where we're based in Lima, as you say. Shivago Duncan is half Iranian, half American, and resides in Mexico City. This is an ongoing project. It's an investigation that he's been looking into since 3 years now, through visual works as well as text. When our pineal gland were big, what he tries to do is synthesize technology from the metaphysical to the physical. In other words, how as we evolve, we lost the sensorial ability to communicate with nature and amongst each other. These are sort of like mythological structures that are based maybe also in biological and scientific theories. This is a Raku technique. It's an ancient traditional Japanese technique, which it's cooked, the ceramic is cooked at very high temperatures. It could vary from 600 to over 1,000 Celsius. And then they're put it sort of in a bin where they burn newspaper. So the enamel of the ceramic starts to crack and darkens, and it gives it a very, very subtle, special texture to it.
Right. Yeah, they're quite extraordinary in terms of their texture and how they
yeah. Then you
and the colors that you use through the glazing are also quite beautiful.
Yeah, they're
Should we
quite
go to William
stunning.
Cordova and talk from a very high temperature technique to a very almost these are the paintings which I also think that are interesting to see because they're it's interesting to see how he achieves the hard edge. And you were explaining about the technique here as well. I forget what you were saying, that they're batik. Exactly. So that in being batik, reaching those hard edges in batik is extraordinarily dexterous, and that is something that is definitely worth underlining. And we can go now to William Pordoa, who is more into collage and into a less quite as complicated technique, but maybe not as precise in looking for a different type of precision in his geometric abstraction.
Correct. This is totally the opposite. What he does is basically he takes recycled painting and he transfers the painting onto the paper and then composes the geometrical forms. They're basically based on pre-Columbian textiles and codification in relationship with architectural designs. Yeah, but it also could be seen as cosmological maps, of
Mm-hmm.
sky.
And he has in this abstraction, he's also making reference to some, not only to the own history of Peru, but also to culture. Can you, like here in this case, it's Untitled Rumimaki, number 8. And Rumimaki is a martial art developed in Peru. So is there a symbology that one could read in this painting, or it just becomes an abstraction that one, just by knowing the history of the culture, one can understand it? Or does that feather have a meaning? Is there anything hidden that we're not reading?
He definitely makes associations through different cultures in different times in history. He makes reference to modernism, and to pre-Columbian textiles, as well as pop culture, because if you look at this detail at the left-hand side, you can see these pasadores. I don't know how you say that in English.
Pasadores?
Pasadores that you use in the sneakers.
Shoelaces.
Oh, the cordones. Someone help us here.
Shoelace.
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 That have a meaning in pop culture also with all these sneakers and so on. So he definitely does focus on making these associations, a little bit trying to rethink history, especially since pre-Columbian culture has been relegated to a more vernacular practice.
So let's talk a little bit about Armando Andrade Tudela, that is not necessarily looking at that vernacular, is also looking at the vernacular, but from a very more sort of minimalist and modernist way, and that would be the next slide. And in this case, he's using denim, which is a new way of technique for him in his painting, even though he has always painted in a way.
Yeah, he studied painting, and this is coming back to painting from a more contemporary standpoint. He uses different parts of denim that then he assembles together and applies bleach to it. In fact,
the assemblage can be seen if one did a zoom, or in the webpage that Livia has, that where you can actually zoom in better, not in this particular PDF, but people can look at it when they look in. And it's interesting because as you said, he's using the technique of removing as opposed to adding to the denim, no?
Correct. The process is similar to film editing in the sense that you cut, you arrange, and you edit. So you will have in this work 4 different textiles joined together. And the bleaching talks a little bit about the process of the cellulite and how you apply light to it and how you corrode it. So that it's this reference is the one he uses by applying the bleach.
And then I'm going to have to move you forward to Gabriela Acevedo Valerde so we can have the last time and we can give everybody time. And there the work is inspired in the designs of Ettore Stosas And there's a relationship between government and political structures. And here as well, there's a lot of editing and cutting and looking at things. So I think it's a good parallel to finish with the Gabriel's work.
Yeah, in Patterns and Parliaments, Gabriel is exploring the different ways of representation in the social space. On one hand, you have the world of desire and consumption, and on the other hand, represented by the patterns of heterostosas. And on the other hand, you have the political arena represented by the parliaments. It's done in a very satiric way. He states that this series of pieces celebrates both the debate and the carnival, so that one thing can never understood without the other. So it's sort of making a critical opinion on how things are settled and how the political realm is handled, which I think is very applicable to what is happening today around the world.
Yep, and with that, we could go to Kate in New York, Kate Warble, that is presenting Lucas Stettner. And Kate has chosen several works and UAVs and paper airplanes, sorry. And Kate, yeah, this is a work that is, again has the same sort of modernist approach to the grid and to the repetition of images and all these wonderful things that we all know about composition, but at the same time, it has a tremendous political and social comment that I would want you to please focus on.
Hi, Anna, thank you. Yeah, so it's a diptych of on one hand, you have the UAVs, which are, for those unaware, I wasn't, unmanned aerial vehicles. They're essentially drones, but they're used by the military. And then Luke Stettner made on the right-hand side a photo collage of paper airplanes. So, I mean, Luke is most interested in the sort of subtlety and this idea that, you know, we're sort of constantly in question what we do and what we look at and what we read. And so I think this is a very nice sort of straightforward example of what he's most interested in, because you have the sort of innocuous form of handmade paper planes, which you would do as a child. And then you have, on the other hand, images, some of them have hands in them, of these drones being used to sort of attack. And you see the hands throwing the drones into the air.
Do you want to talk about the next image that is guns? And I think that that's interesting, what the conversation we were having the other day about not only the found images, but also everything that is related around this composition.
Yeah, so these are, so this is a work of Glock handguns. And, you know, I didn't know this either, but Luke did a lot of research, and this is how guns are sold, or guns are displayed on the resale market. So the sort of grid of these guns would be what you would see if you were going to go purchase a gun online. You would scroll through and you would see.
And anywhere, right? eBay,
yeah,
Craigslist, I don't know, but almost, no?
Exactly, yeah. So, so these images are all taken from these resale websites for handguns, for Glocks, except for one image in here, which is the sort of hidden image, which was taken from, it was a selfie, or not a selfie, a photograph that Dylan Roof took of his gun that he used in the Emmanuel Church shooting. And so this is a little bit of a difficult artwork, you know, I mean, but if you are a gun enthusiast, you know, perhaps this is what you're used to seeing all the time.
And you were also, I mean, and in the statement, the artist statement, there was also a reference to his son and how he, you know, children's play ends up being very bellicose. And then as we grow up, we have a completely different relationship with guns and power and of course of bellicose activities. So is there any insight that you can give us around that?
Well, I mean, I think Luke really approaches this with his own, his own personal history with, being male and growing up in the United States, and sort of it is a sort of rite of passage for kids to be interested in guns and playing with guns, and then and sort of then to understand sort of what that means, and I think going back to the paper airplane piece, that sort of brings up the sort of starting out as a child and then sort of understanding what the implications are of a drone and of a militaristic plane. So Anna, I'm not sure exactly.
No, I think that's great. We can also look at the next image.
Yeah.
And here it's a collaboration with another artist, and which is Sandra Erbacher. And I think that the history behind it is quite interesting, and you might want to give us an insight to that, aside from the composition, which is also kind of very enticing.
Yeah. So Sandra is a German artist. Luke's grandparents fled from Nazi Germany during World War II, during the onset of World War II. Sandra's grandparents stayed and participated as Nazis in World War II. Sandra came to see Luke's last solo show at my gallery was very much about his grandparents and their history fleeing fascism, fleeing the Nazis. And Sandra had read about it and came to see the show, and they met through that, and they began writing and collaborating and decided to make a series of artworks together. And so this is particularly interesting because Sandra has pulled some images from German publications, and Luke has pulled some from American publications. And they're both coming at this idea of the sort of ambiguity of life, really, and sort of backgrounds and where people are, where images are coming from. It's very much present in these works. And then there's also a little bit of humor between the Zeppelin, which was the first aerial form of war.
Hey, Freddie.
And
yay. Thank you. You too. Bye.
The dildo. So.
Well, thank you, Kate. And then let's go to Nicole Beauchesne, or Nickel. I don't know anymore how to pronounce it.
It's Nicole, hardly. Nicole Beauchesne.
Nicole. Okay. So sorry about that. I always say Nicole. I guess I'm doing the Spanish reading. It's the Latin that comes out. And Nicole is presenting Panayotis Lucas, which is a Greek artist. And again, to sort of conclude, I think that there's a tremendous amount of information here, which is quite interesting, which has to do, of course, with the fables, the fable characters, again, figures or objects that are animated in one way or another. It takes us back to this sort of surrealist and strange world that we're living today. So if you could tell us a little bit about how this works.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, by the way. It's great to see all you guys. Panayotis is a new artist that we just started working with. This is actually the first time that we presented his work. It's very psychological. There's a lot of twists, ironic twists happening within each frame. There's a lot of psychedelic elements mixed with folklore elements, pop culture elements, and certainly you'll see elements of horror as well. Not in such a menacing way, but they're light paintings. I feel like there's some levity to them. He's an older artist. He's Greek, so he went to the Athens School of Art, graduated in '99. So he's in his mid-40s, which I think is really interesting. First of all, I think it's interesting that a European artist is making figuration in this way, but also that he's an older artist and he has been showing for some time. He was in a Berlin biennial, he was in an Athens biennial, and also the Dusty Foundation worked with him. Natalie Bell and Margot Norton curated him into a show called The Same River Twice, which was at the Benaki Museum. So he's got a little bit of interesting history coming to me, but his work has definitely evolved and changed. He showed at the Breeder for years, still figurative work, but not so complicated. So all of his paintings are, they almost serve as allegories. You know, they're almost like a novel in a way, like each painting is unfolding in a very non-linear way in terms of time. So things are happening simultaneously, continuously.
Yeah, here you have some African masks, then the hand coming in, the Swiss clock, the animated teapot, the dwarf, the cat, the fire, the fireplace.
Yeah, they're really complicated.
And a painting within a painting.
Yeah, and the larger paintings, there's certainly a lot more elements sort of built into them. So this one is 87 by 74 inches, so it's huge. And so, you know, you sort of miss a lot of it until you're up close looking at these things, but they're so technically well done. This one's called Master of Two Servants. It's actually a play on a Carlo Goldoni play, who was an Italian playwright. And the original play was called The Servant of Two Masters. So it's about like power balance and sort of the slippages between those power structures. So yeah, probably.
And then
you know,
let's go to the last slide that we have here, which is Hexensabbat, which translates to witch's Sabbath.
Exactly.
So we can go back to our very sort of utopic moment that we're living right now.
Yeah, and you know, it's questionable as to who has the power in a lot of these paintings. So it's questionable and arguable that these two cats are, you know, the witches, or maybe the human is. But yeah, they sort of unfold in a really interesting way. And the cats do come up quite a bit in his work.
And you seem to have like a mad moon. You know, the old man and the moon, it really looks old.
They're trippy, man. These paintings are so trippy. I feel like it's Fantasia on acid in some way, you know? But yeah, sometimes like in the last piece, that cat is considered to be a self-portrait in a way.
Yeah.
So the cast of characters, you know, there's definitely a vast variety of them, but they keep, you know, some of the same ones keep creeping in for sure, which is interesting. But and you know, there's some, I don't know if we have the smaller ones on here, but he does, this is also very large. He does make these smaller canvases, which are a little more minimal in just the terms of imagery. Which are more reflective of like his own personal space and moods. So when he gets really large like this, it's sort of a compilation of all of it, really.
So we have to go into your webpage to see the other images, the smaller ones, the ones that are not as complex.
Yeah, but we'll have his first New York solo show, first time really ever showing in the States this spring. So we're really excited about that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, all of you, very much. We can close the presentation for now, or maybe leave it open in case there's some questions and people want to come in and have some questions about the specific works, or if any of the panelists here or gallerists here today would like to mention something about their fellow gallerist works, we're open to questions and comments. Everybody's muted. And I don't know if there are any questions in the chat or somewhere that I think Elizabeth is managing that. I would appreciate if you do. And you can act as moderator now.
Thank you, Anna. Does anybody have any questions while we're all here? You can leave them in the chat. Somebody's saying thank you, Anna. Great presentation.
Well, thank you all.
Lots of thanks coming through.
Does anybody want to say anything that they didn't say about the artist that we talked about that escaped your thought, or want to close with a sort of statement regarding our zeitgeist and anything that you see that is going to happen or is happening, or any experience that you might have had? No? Well, so then I guess we have time to go into, everybody go back to the OVRs and do some shopping.
Mauricia, did you have something? I think you were about to say something.
Yes, maybe just mentioning the fact that we have the presentations on show, so where people are actually able to come and see them. In my case, we're having it in Mexico City, and then I know the other galleries are each in their own city, but that's a very important thing to mention, I think.
Yep. That's great. Yeah, I think that we should all go back and look at the things and the many others that we also missed from this from working with this small presentation and the small period of time that we were allotted. But I think that we got a lot in, and congratulations to all for your selection. And thank you for indulging me in this exercise.
Thank you so much, Anna.
Thank you.
Anna, thank you. All the links to the galleries are in the chat if you want to go and visit the galleries on the NADA Miami website, as well as the VIP program as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Anna.
Bye.
Bye.